The night began as any other, cicadas buzzing, wheat whispering under the wind, and Elias walking the fence line with his lantern swaying gently. But then came the lights. Not the scatter of fireflies nor the streak of a meteor. These were deliberate, shifting, and too low to the ground. He paused by his scarecrow, uneasy, his hand gripping the wooden post as the air seemed to thrum. A streak cut across the orchard and crashed beyond the ridge with a muffled thunder that rattled his bones. He rushed toward the glow, mud sucking at his boots. The wheat bent unnaturally, scorched black as though pressed by an invisible hand. In the heart of the field lay a figure, tall, armored in jagged plates that shimmered faintly violet and clearly not of this world. Her body was curled in pain, her mask cracked across one cheek. He stopped dead, breath fogging. This was no dream. The legends of fallen stars whispered in old taverns had come alive on his soil. The alien woman tried to rise but collapsed, back into the mud with a groan that sounded more like a growl. Her glowing eyes met his, fierce and wary, before fluttering shut. Blood, dark and iridescent, stained his wheat. Elias's heart pounded with the instinct to run. But another instinct, older and stronger, rooted him. A farmer's duty to life, no matter what form it takes. He crouched, hands trembling, and lifted her heavier-than-expected frame into his arms. Carrying her back to the farmhouse was like carrying a storm. She stirred once, muttering something in a musical tongue he couldn't place before going limp again. The lantern light revealed her alien armor, carved with runes that pulsed faintly, and the sharp, predatory angles of her face, softened only by exhaustion. He pushed open his door, whispering apologies to no one in particular, and laid her gently on the old cot by the hearth. The firelight flickered across her, painting her as half-warrior, half-dream. Elias sat in the shadows, staring at her strange features, pointed ears adorned with rings of silver, a jawline marked by faint glowing patterns, and lips that whispered foreign syllables in her sleep. Fear and awe wrestled in his chest. What? Farmer tended to wheat one evening and an alien fugitive the next? He poured water into a clay cup and set it by her side, though he doubted she'd drink. His dog, Old Bristle, sniffed at her armor before backing away with a whine. "Easy, boy," Elias muttered, though the words were as much for himself as for the hound. By dawn, Elias had not slept. He had only sat there, watching the rise and fall of her strange chest, listening to the faint hum of her armor. And when her eyes finally opened again, sharp, unblinking, violet-like starlight, he knew life on his farm had changed forever. Kareth awoke with a jolt, hand reaching for a weapon that was no longer there. Her gaze swept the room, landing on Elias. The farmer froze, still holding the kettle he had been pouring. She spoke, her words sharp and commanding, yet meaningless to his ears. He raised his hands slowly, like he would with a spooked horse. "Easy," he said softly. "You're safe here." But her eyes narrowed with suspicion. She tried to rise, her strength betraying her. Her body shook violently, forcing her back down onto the cot. Elias stepped forward, offering her bread and water. She hissed something at him, shoving the cup away, yet her lips cracked with thirst. A tense silence stretched. Finally, with a trembling hand, she accepted the cup and drank, though her eyes never left him. Later, she revealed a small, broken device from her armor. With effort, it flickered to life, projecting fractured translations. Her voice crackled through the machine. "Kareth, my name, you, farmer?" Elias nodded. She tilted her head, confusion softening her guarded expression. He pointed to himself. "Elias," then pointed outside. "Farm, over the next days." A rhythm formed. Elias would tend his crops by day, while Kareth, too injured to help, watched silently from the porch. He caught her eyes following his movements as he repaired fences, milked goats, or knelt to weed. When he asked why, she tapped her chest and muttered through the translator, "Royal." Her hands mimed a crown, then clenched in disgust. "Run away." Through piecemeal words and gestures, her story emerged. Once a chosen heir to some distant throne, she rejected her people's rights of conquest. For that, she became prey. Her hunters tracked her across worlds, and she had fallen, literally, into his field. Elias listened, brow furrowed. Empires, thrones, crowns, it all sounded like stories too far away to matter. Yet here she was, bleeding into his soil. Kareth, in turn, marveled at him. No crown, no blade, no army, just hands hardened by years of work. When he showed her a seed sprouting in the palm of his hand, explaining in halting words, her eyes widened as though he had conjured life itself. She touched the fragile stem with awe, whispering something reverent in her tongue. Each night by the hearth, silence gave way to tentative conversations. His jokes made little sense to her, yet his laughter was so unguarded she found herself laughing too. The fugitive princess, once taught to fear weakness, now felt oddly protected by the man who wore calluses like armor. And as days passed, Elias found himself no longer seeing an alien on his cot. He saw Kareth, tired, scarred, but alive. And strangely, he wanted her to stay. The farmhouse, once plain and predictable, now carried the tension of two worlds colliding. Kareth's alien armor leaned against the wall beside Elias's worn plow. Her spear fragments rested on the mantel above the hearth, alongside jars of pickled beans and dried herbs. It was as if the house couldn't decide whether it belonged to a farmer or a fugitive princess. One evening, Elias brought Kareth to the fields, showing her the ridges of soil where his new crop would sprout. She tilted her head, crouching low, running her fingers through the dirt as though it were some strange substance. When he pressed a seed into her palm, her expression shifted. Half reverence, half disbelief. "You bury food?" she asked, through the translator, incredulous. He chuckled. "Not bury, grow." He guided her hand, showing her how to press the seed into the soil. Patience. Back in the farmhouse, she watched him mend a broken fence post, hammering with a steady rhythm. "Why fix?" she asked. "It will break again." Elias shrugged. "Everything breaks. Fix it anyway." Her gaze lingered on him, puzzled but oddly moved. For a woman raised in palaces where nothing was ever repaired, only replaced, the idea felt alien to her. As trust deepened, their conversations grew less about survival and more about values. Kareth spoke of the halls of crystal where she had once lived, every decision weighed against politics, every gesture scrutinized. Elias countered with the freedom of his fields, where a man was measured by whether his crops lived or died. She had been a prisoner of power, he a servant to the soil. Yet in both, they recognized the same quiet resilience. Late at night, Elias caught her humming softly, a haunting melody that seemed to stir the very air. The crops near the porch swayed, though no wind touched them. He asked what it was, and she told him it was a hymn to growth sung by her ancestors. To him, it was just a song. To her, it was heritage. Together, they sat under the stars, her hymn blending with his silence, and for once, neither of them felt alone. The bond was not spoken aloud. It was forged in the quiet clink of cups, the shared effort of planting, the soft glances when words failed. Elias realized that this woman, hunted and wounded, carried more strength than any warrior he'd ever imagined. And Kareth realized that this man, grounded and ordinary, had a courage her empire could never breed. The farmhouse, once empty and quiet, had become a place of transformation. Two worlds had been forced into the same room, and against all odds, they were beginning to fit. It was the dogs that barked first, their frantic howls breaking the night's silence. Elias rushed outside, lantern swinging, only to see shadows flickering at the edge of his wheat. Figures moved like wolves, silent, predatory, their armor glinting faintly in the moonlight. His heart froze. Whoever had been chasing Kareth had finally found her refuge. Kareth appeared at his side, her mask hastily strapped back on, violet eyes burning with recognition and fury. "Hunters!" she spat through her broken translator. The word sent a chill down Elias's spine. These weren't thieves. They were soldiers bred for pursuit. She gripped the splintered haft of her broken spear, a weapon barely fit for defense. Elias, weaponless except for his father's old hunting rifle, tightened his jaw. "This is my farm," he muttered. The shadows advanced. One slipped forward, blades flashing. Like moonlight, but Kareth intercepted with a snarl, moving faster than Elias could follow. Armor cracked, sparks flew, and her movements were a blur of predatory grace. For a moment, he was reminded of the storm she had been when he first carried her. Yet she staggered, her wounds not yet healed, and another hunter closed in from behind. Elias didn't think. He raised the rifle and fired. The shot shattered the night, scattering birds into the sky. The hunter dropped, armor scorched. His hands shook, not from recoil, but from the realization. He had just taken his place. In Kareth's war, she glanced back, violet eyes wide, not with scorn, but with something that looked dangerously like respect. The skirmish was brutal, but short. Kareth drove the last hunter limping back into the trees, though blood streaked her cheek and her breathing came ragged. Elias hurried to her, catching her arm before she collapsed. "They'll return," she whispered hoarsely. "They never stop." His gaze swept his farm, his wheat trampled, his peace shattered. He knew she was right. That night, Elias sat by the fire with Kareth, both silent, the smell of gunpowder and alien blood still lingering in the air. His farm had been invaded, but what weighed heavier was the sight of Kareth, tired, bruised, but unbroken. He had defended her not as a guest, but as something closer to kin. And in that moment, something shifted between them. The farm was no longer just his. It was theirs. And to protect it, Elias realized he would need to become far more than a farmer. Morning came heavy, the air thick with the remnants of smoke and blood. Elias went to the field to replant the seeds trampled during the night attack. His hands dug into the soil, steady, determined. Beside him, Kareth limped into the rows, stubbornly refusing to rest. She insisted on helping, though her hands trembled as they pressed seeds into the earth. Watching her crouch in the dirt, clad in battered armor streaked with mud, Elias felt an odd pang. She was no longer the untouchable warrior who had fallen from the sky. She was a fugitive, scarred and vulnerable, kneeling in his field like any other laborer. And yet there was dignity in her persistence, even in the way she fumbled with the fragile seeds. At midday, Elias brought out bread and goat's cheese. Kareth sniffed at it with suspicion before nibbling. To his surprise, her eyes widened, and she let out a sound halfway between laughter and a sigh. "Simple. Honest," she said haltingly through her translator. Elias grinned. "Best I can do." For a woman raised among crystal palaces, the taste of plain bread seemed to strike her as something profound. That evening, she surprised him by showing a fragment of her culture. She gathered stones from the field and carved faint, glowing runes into them. When arranged in a circle, they pulsed with soft light, illuminating the porch in hues of violet and gold. Elias stared in wonder as Kareth explained, "To guard, to grow." Her people used such wards to bless crops. For the first time, Elias saw not just the fugitive, but the princess in her, the keeper of forgotten traditions. As days passed, their bond deepened. Elias taught her how to swing an axe properly, how to carry buckets of water, how to mend a fence. She, in turn, showed him how to read the stars for hidden paths, how to sharpen blades with alien precision, how to hum the hymns that quickened growth in the soil. Their lessons became their language, words unnecessary where action sufficed. One night, Kareth sat beside him on the porch, gazing at the horizon. Your world. Small, but alive. My world, large, but dying. Elias considered this, chewing on the thought. Maybe what's small survives because we tend it, he said. She turned, eyes gleaming. For the first time, she smiled without reserve. The seeds planted in the soil were fragile, but the seeds planted between them, of trust, of something deeper, were beginning to take root. The hunters did not wait long. A week later, the night sky burned again, this time with fire raining across the ridge. Elias and Kareth stood at the edge of the fields, watching in grim silence as warships hovered like vultures, their lights sweeping the ground. They've brought more, Kareth said coldly. They will burn everything to take me. Elias clenched his fists. The farm was no fortress. He had no army, no walls, only fields of wheat and a house too old to withstand fire, yet his jaw set with quiet defiance. Then we don't let them take you, he said. Kareth looked at him, searching his face for hesitation. There was none. That night, they prepared. Elias sharpened every tool he had, sickles, axes, even pitchforks, laying them out like weapons. Kareth adjusted her broken armor, etching new runes of strength into its cracks. Together they devised traps across the fields, tripwires strung between fence posts, ditches disguised beneath straw. The farmhouse itself became a fortress of desperation. As firelight stained the horizon, Kareth paused, watching Elias drive, a stake into the earth. Why? She asked. I am not your kin, not your people. Elias leaned on the post, breathing heavily. Doesn't matter. You're here. You're mine to protect. His words carried no romance, no theatrics, just stubborn sincerity. For Kareth, bred to a throne where loyalty was always bought, it struck deeper than any vow. When the hunters came, the farm roared to life. Traps snapped, fires blazed, and Elias fought like a man possessed, swinging an axe with raw fury, using the land he had tended as a weapon. Kareth danced through the chaos, fierce and elegant, her glowing eyes and runes painting her as something more myth than flesh. But the cost was heavy. By dawn, the fields were blackened, and the farmhouse half collapsed. Elias sat in the ruins, exhausted, bleeding yet alive. Beside him, Kareth stood tall despite her wounds, gazing at the horizon with fire still burning in her eyes. It was then that Elias realized. This war wasn't just hers anymore. By sheltering her, by standing with her, he had bound his fate to hers. And strangely, he did not regret it. The farm smelled of smoke for weeks. Blackened fields stretched where golden wheat once stood, and Elias's hands bled from replanting stalks that would take seasons to grow. Each day he rose before dawn, stubbornly pressing life into scorched soil. Kareth watched, restless, her body itching for war, but tethered by his persistence. One morning she knelt beside him, her armor stripped away, only bandages and simple cloth covering her. "This is not my fight," she murmured. Elias pushed seeds into the earth and replied without looking up, "Then let me fight it." The simplicity of his words broke through her walls more than any oath of loyalty ever could. At night, she joined him in the ruined barn, shaping wood into makeshift supports, her hands clumsy at first, then precise. Elias caught himself staring at the way her glowing eyes reflected firelight, not with the fury of battle, but with a quiet warmth. For a fugitive princess, this work, the labor of survival, was foreign, yet she embraced it. Days bled into weeks. Villagers came to see the foreign woman who now worked beside Elias. Rumors spread like wildfire that she was cursed, that she brought the storm. But some whispered differently, that she was a guardian, that she and Elias were sowing something greater than crops. One evening, as fireflies flickered across the fields, Kareth whispered something she had never admitted. "Where I come from, loyalty is bought. Here you give it freely." Elias, exhausted, only grunted. But she smiled, because she knew his silence was truer than words. For the first time, Kareth did not feel like prey or predator. She felt like a root pushing quietly into the soil, hidden but growing, and Elias realized the same, that survival was not just in resisting fire, but in planting again, even in ash. Kareth's reprieve was brief. Scouts returned to the village, with news of an army, a true legion of hunters, marching with machines of fire and wings of steel. This time they would not come as shadows, but as conquerors. Fear rippled through the people, and whispers of betrayal spread. Some argued Elias should hand her over. The village elders confronted him, their voices stern. "She brings ruin. Cast her out." Elias stood before them, dirt-streaked and weary, yet unyielding. "She stays. She bled for this land. That makes her one of us." His words silenced the hall, not because of eloquence, but because no one could deny the scars on Kareth's arms, nor the blackened fields she had helped replant. Kareth herself wrestled with the truth. She could not bear to see his people suffer. That night, she approached Elias in the barn, holding her broken spear. "If I go, they live." Elias shook his head, slamming a fist into the wood. "If you go, they die anyway, because they'll know we can be broken." It was then she confessed her secret. The hunters pursued her not merely for treason, but because she carried the last fragment of her people's royal seal, a crystal shard fused to her chest, glowing faintly beneath her skin. Without it, her empire could never crown a ruler. With it, her hunters would never stop. Elias stared, stunned, before muttering, "So we don't run. We finish this." Together, they began preparing the village, not just with traps, but with unity. Elias taught farmers to wield scythes like halberds, children to set signals with torches, elders to hide in tunnels. Kareth drilled them in formations, her voice sharp, her eyes blazing. For the first time, Elias saw her as she truly was, not just a fugitive, but a queen in exile, shaping farmers into warriors. When the storm clouds of fire gathered on the horizon, the village stood ready. Not a fortress, but a family armed with fury and hope. The hunters would find not prey, but resistance. The battle began at dawn, the fields glowing crimson as enemy ships blotted out the sun. Hunters marched in black ranks, their armor gleaming like obsidian. Behind them, engines roared, machines designed to scorch earth and salt it barren. Elias stood at the front line, axe in hand, Kareth at his side with her spear reforged from alien steel and farmer's iron. The clash was chaos. Traps sprung, fire engulfed the fields, and villagers fought with desperate ferocity. Elias swung his axe until his arms ached, cutting down foes twice his size. Beside him, Kareth was a whirlwind, her glowing eyes and runes transforming her into something almost divine. Together they held the line, every step a defiance, but numbers weighed heavily. Hunters pressed forward, their machines belching flame. The villagers faltered. Elias fell to one knee, blood soaking his shirt, only to feel Kareth's hand gripping his shoulder. Her voice thundered, "Stand!" And somehow, through sheer force of will, he did. At the battle's heart, Kareth faced the leader of the hunters, a towering figure cloaked in crystal armor. They clashed in a storm of steel and light, her spear shattering his blade, his strikes rattling her bones. Elias, staggering, hurled himself into the fight, striking with his axe. Together, human and alien tore down the commander, their blows fueled not by power but by unity. When the leader fell, the hunters wavered. Elias, chest heaving, raised the broken axe above his head. Kareth lifted the glowing shard from her chest, its light blazing across the battlefield. The sight stunned both villagers and hunters alike, human and alien standing together, not as captor and fugitive, but as kin. The hunters broke. Some fled, others surrendered, their faith in conquest shattered. The machines stilled, their fire sputtering. The village, battered and bloodied, still stood, and amidst the ruins of the last harvest, a seed of victory was planted. The battlefield was quiet. Smoke curled over charred fields, and the air was thick with the smell of ash and blood. Yet amidst the ruin, life stirred, children gathering wheat heads spared by fire, elders tending the wounded. The village was scarred, but alive. Kareth stood on the ridge, her armor broken, her face streaked with dirt and blood. In her hands, she held the shard of her people's crown. It pulsed faintly, whispering of thrones and empires. But when she looked down at Elias, tending the soil with blistered hands, she knew where her loyalty lay. That night, the villagers gathered around a fire. Kareth stood beside Elias as he addressed them. "This land is ours," he said, voice hoarse. "Not because we fought for it, but because we refused to give it up." He gestured to Kareth, who held the shard high. "And from now on, no one fights alone." The crowd roared, their cheers echoing into the dark. Later, beneath the stars, Kareth sat with Elias in the rebuilt barn. "I could still leave," she whispered. Elias shrugged, leaning back. "And I could still plant wheat in salted ground. Doesn't mean it wouldn't grow." She smiled at that, small and genuine, her hand brushing against his. In the weeks that followed, the farm bloomed again. Green shoots pushed stubbornly through blackened earth, stronger than before. Kareth, once a fugitive, now walked openly. Among the people, her spear not as a weapon of fear but as a symbol of guardianship. Elias found himself glancing at her often, seeing not a queen, not a soldier, but a partner. Years later, when tales were told of the fire and the battle, bards sang not of hunters or crowns, but of a farmer and a fugitive who planted hope together. For, in soil and soul alike, they had grown something eternal.